All right, so today we're going deep on Iranian geopolitics, really trying to understand how geography shapes their military strategy, both defensively and offensively. And we've got some fascinating stuff to work with here. We're looking at excerpts from how geography would doom any invasion of Iran, the national interest. We've got an analysis of Iran's conventional military capabilities by the New Lines Institute. And then a piece from Vox, a nasty, brutal fight, what a U.S.-Iran war would look like.
Yeah, it's a really it's a fascinating topic. Iran's geography has really played like a defining role in its history, and it, continues to heavily influence its strategic calculations today.
Absolutely. And to kind of kick things off here, it's helpful just to grasp the sheer scale of Iran. And
Yeah.
we're talking about a country that's larger than Western Europe combined. Think France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal, all put together. It's also the 16th most populous country globally,
Yeah.
with a population that, exceeds that of France or the UK.
Yeah, and it's not just the size, but the terrain that's really, really remarkable. Mountains just dominate the landscape, particularly the Zagros Mountains. They stretch over 900 miles along Iran's western border, forming this like natural barrier.
Yeah.
So unlike its neighbors, you think of those expansive plains, Iran is defined by these imposing mountain ranges, and it's really had an impact on where its population centers have developed.
Yeah, and I imagine that's had a huge impact on Iran's defensive capabilities throughout history as well. I mean, conquering Iran has proven to be exceptionally difficult.
Yeah.
The Mongols, who invaded from the northeast, are really the only force to have truly succeeded.
Right. And even then, it was a long and arduous campaign.
Oh, absolutely.
Even powerful empires like the Ottomans, despite reaching the Caspian Sea, they were never able to penetrate the Persian heartland.
Yeah, I mean, the terrain just makes it so difficult
Yeah.
to maneuver large armies. And the logistical challenges of just applying a force in that kind of terrain are immense. I mean, essentially, Iran is a natural fortress.
It is, and it makes any sort of invasion a truly daunting prospect. And this geographical reality has really shaped Iran's military doctrine, leading it to adopt what's known as a passive defense strategy.
Right, and the New Lines Institute analysis goes into detail about this passive defense doctrine. It emphasizes camouflage, concealment, and the use of underground facilities, really leveraging the terrain to maximize the survivability of Iranian forces,
Yeah.
which, poses a real challenge for any potential attacker.
Oh, absolutely. It makes it incredibly difficult to target them effectively.
Right.
And even if you can locate them, the terrain itself provides natural cover and
It
concealment.
makes any kind of offensive operation incredibly costly and risky.
Exactly. However, this same geography that provides Iran with these defensive advantages also imposes some pretty serious limitations.
Right.
The mountainous terrain, coupled with the vast deserts, and the limited access to ports really restricts Iran's economic and military options. For instance, despite having these vast oil reserves, the lack of inhabitable plains restricts economic growth.
Right, so it's a double-edged sword in a way.
Yeah, it is.
And this brings us, I think, to the concept of asymmetric warfare, because Iran, recognizing its limitations in terms of conventional military power, has developed a strategy that focuses on these cost-effective tactics that can offset the strengths of its adversaries.
Precisely. They can't compete head to head, so they have to find other ways to level the playing field.
And what are some of the key elements of this asymmetric strategy?
Well, a big one is their use of proxies. So, groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, they provide Iran with a way to project power and influence without directly engaging its own forces.
Right, so it allows them to maintain a degree of plausible deniability.
Exactly, and it makes it much harder for their adversaries to respond effectively. Because if you strike back against a proxy, you risk escalating the conflict with Iran itself.
Right, it's a very delicate balancing act.
It is.
And then beyond proxies,
There are also things like ballistic and cruise missiles, cyber warfare capabilities, and the ability to disrupt shipping in strategic choke points like the Strait of Hormuz.
yeah, the Strait of Hormuz, that's always a major concern.
It is. It's a vital choke point for global oil transport, and Iran has repeatedly threatened to close it if they come under attack.
Right, and even a temporary closure of the Strait of Hormuz
Yeah.
would have massive repercussions for the global economy.
Absolutely. It would send oil prices skyrocketing and disrupt supply chains all over the world.
So it's a very powerful card for them to hold.
It is, and it really underscores the potential for Iran to cause chaos and disruption, even if they can't defeat their adversaries militarily.
Right. So it's this combination of a strong defensive posture coupled with the ability to project power asymmetrically. That creates this really complex strategic situation.
Absolutely. It makes the prospect of any conflict with Iran extremely risky and potentially unpredictable.
Yeah, because you're never quite sure how they're going to respond.
Right. And any attempt to contain them
Hmm.
could easily backfire and lead to a wider conflict.
So it's a situation that demands a great deal of caution and restraint.
It does, and a deep understanding of the complexities involved.
Absolutely.
Now, this leads us to consider the potential flashpoints for conflict. Because tensions with the U.S. and regional rivals remain high,
Right.
and there are a number of possible triggers, ranging from targeted killings and cyber attacks to attacks on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, and the Strait of Hormuz, as we've discussed, is particularly crucial because it's such a vital choke point for global oil transport.
Absolutely. Any disruption there
Right.
would be a major concern for the international community.
Definitely, definitely.
Now, in the event of a full-blown conflict, the U.S., with its superior military power, would likely aim to swiftly cripple Iran's military infrastructure, primarily through air and naval power. However, as the Vox article highlights, this approach is not without its risks and challenges.
Right, because on paper, it seems like the U.S. would have a clear advantage.
Right, but it's not that simple.
Yeah.
First of all, Iran has been preparing for this kind of conflict for decades.
Right.
They've developed a sophisticated air defense system, and they've dispersed their military assets, making it difficult to target them effectively.
So even with air superiority.
It wouldn't be easy for the U.S. to achieve its objectives quickly.
Right. And then there's the issue of civilian casualties.
That's a major concern. Any large-scale military operation carries the risk of significant civilian casualties, which could further inflame anti-U.S. sentiment and potentially strengthen Iran's resolve.
Right. So it could backfire.
It could. And then there's the question of what happens after the initial strikes. Even if the U.S. manages to cripple Iran's military, they would still have to deal with the aftermath, which could include a prolonged insurgency or even a regional war.
Yeah. So it's not a situation that can be resolved purely through military means.
It's not. There has to be a political solution as well.
And that, of course, is the really difficult part.
It is.
Now, a full-scale ground invasion of Iran.
That's something that most experts believe is highly unlikely.
Yeah.
Given the size and terrain of the country,
Right.
it would be a logistical nightmare, and it would almost certainly lead to a prolonged and bloody conflict.
It's a very, very daunting prospect.
It is, and there's a historical precedent for this.
Right.
Back in 2002, the U.S. military conducted a war game, simulating a conflict with Iran.
And what were the findings of that war game?
Well, it showed that even with superior naval power, the U.S. could still suffer significant losses.
Really?
Yes, Iran was able to use its asymmetric capabilities to inflict heavy damage on U.S. ships and to disrupt U.S. operations in the Persian Gulf.
So it really highlights the potential for miscalculation and escalation.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even the most powerful military can be vulnerable to asymmetric tactics.
So while the U.S. might have overwhelming conventional military might, Iran's geography and its asymmetric strategy create this really complex and dangerous situation.
They do.
And any conflict,
Yeah.
even if it's initiated by the U.S., with the aim of a swift and decisive victory, could easily escalate into a prolonged and bloody affair
Absolutely.
with far-reaching consequences.
It's a very sobering thought.
It is. It really is.
And it underscores the need for a cautious and measured approach.
Absolutely.
And for a deep understanding of all the factors at play.
Well, I think this is a good point to pause for, and we'll continue our exploration of Iranian geopolitics in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening.
See you then. So given all of these challenges, facing any sort of U.S.-led intervention, Iran's counter-strategy in a full-blown war, it would likely revolve around avoiding these large-scale direct confrontations and instead leveraging its network of proxies and its asymmetric capabilities to inflict pain on a global scale.
Yeah, the Vox article refers to this as Iran's global chaos strategy, and it paints a rather unsettling picture of potential scenarios. They could launch attacks on U.S. troops and diplomats in vulnerable locations like Syria and Iraq.
Yeah, and those attacks could potentially, lead to American casualties.
Absolutely.
And then we can't forget about Hezbollah, Iran's, well-armed and experienced proxy in Lebanon. Iran could activate Hezbollah
Yeah.
to launch attacks against Israel.
And that could potentially trigger another devastating conflict in the Levant
Yeah,
and draw in other international actors.
absolutely. It could quickly spiral out of control.
Yeah, and the potential consequences extend far beyond the Middle East as well.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, Iran could orchestrate terrorist attacks in Europe and Latin America, striking at the heart of U.S. allies
Mm.
and creating this sense of global insecurity.
Yeah, they have a long reach. And they've shown a willingness to use it in the past.
And then you've got their cyber warfare capabilities.
Yeah.
Those shouldn't be underestimated.
No, not at
And
all.
Iran could launch crippling cyber attacks against critical infrastructure
Yeah.
in the U.S. and allied nations.
Yeah, disrupting essential services like power grids, financial systems, communication networks.
I mean, such attacks could cause widespread panic and significant economic damage.
Oh, absolutely. It would be a real blow to the global economy.
So rather than a contained regional conflict, a war with Iran has the potential to spiral into this multifaceted global crisis
It does.
with impacts on energy markets, international security, the global economy.
It's a very dangerous scenario.
It really is.
And it's one that we need to take very seriously.
And I think it's important to remember that geography dictates strategy.
Yes, it does.
And in Iran's case, its unique geographical circumstances necessitate embracing asymmetry.
Right. They have to make the most of what they have.
Yeah, to compensate for its limitations in terms of conventional military power.
Exactly.
And so while they might be at a disadvantage in a traditional head-to-head military confrontation,
Right.
their asymmetric strategy poses a credible threat to their adversaries,
It does.
making any potential conflict a risky proposition
Absolutely.
with unpredictable and potentially devastating consequences.
It's a very complex and dangerous situation.
Yeah, so the key takeaway here is that a war with Iran would not be a quick or clean affair.
No, it would not.
It would likely be a protracted and messy conflict.
With the potential to escalate into a global crisis.
Which leads to, I think, a very critical question. Given the potential for such devastating consequences, how can diplomatic efforts be strengthened to avert such a conflict and find a path towards de-escalation?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Finding a peaceful resolution requires a deep understanding of the complex interplay of factors driving the tensions.
Right.
This includes everything from Iran's regional ambitions, their nuclear program, the U.S.'s security concerns, the role of key regional actors.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it also requires, I think, a willingness on all sides to engage in meaningful dialogue,
Absolutely.
to build trust.
And to find common ground.
Right. And without those efforts, the risk of stumbling into a catastrophic conflict remains a very real possibility.
It does. And there's another critical aspect that's often overlooked in these discussions, the internal dynamics within Iran itself.
You're referring to the economic challenges they face.
Precisely. Iran's economy is burdened by sanctions, internal inefficiencies, and it struggles to provide for its large population.
And this economic strain further limits its conventional military options
Yes, it does.
and fuels its reliance on asymmetric strategies.
Exactly.
So it becomes this vicious cycle.
It does.
The geographical constraints hinder economic growth, which in turn forces them to adopt this military doctrine that relies on unconventional tactics, further exacerbating tensions with the international community.
Exactly. It's a very difficult situation to break out of.
It really is.
And this is where diplomacy becomes even more crucial. Addressing the underlying economic grievances could potentially create an environment that's more conducive to negotiations and de-escalation.
Right. So it seems that understanding Iran's strategic posture requires looking beyond just military capabilities.
It does.
They need to consider the complex interplay of geography, economics, internal politics.
Absolutely. It's a multidimensional problem.
It really is.
And it requires a multidimensional solution.
Well, I think this deep dive has been incredibly illuminating, shedding light on the intricate web of factors shaping Iran's strategic posture.
It has. And it underscores the importance of informed analysis and a multidimensional approach to understanding these complex geopolitical challenges.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a lot to ponder. How can we leverage this knowledge to promote dialogue, to address the underlying issues, and ultimately to work towards a more peaceful and stable future?
That's the challenge and the opportunity before us. This deep dive has provided you with the necessary insights to engage in these critical discussions and to contribute to a more informed understanding of Iran's place in the world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. on this deep dive into the fortress of Iranian geopolitics. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that will inform your own analysis and understanding of this complex issue. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
It strikes me that this situation presents a real dilemma for policymakers.
On the one hand, Iran's asymmetric capabilities and its willingness to use them make a military solution extremely risky.
Yeah, it's not a situation where you can simply go in with overwhelming force
Yeah,
and expect a quick and easy victory.
exactly. But on the other hand, allowing Iran to continue developing its nuclear program and expanding its regional influence unchecked also poses significant risks.
Right, it's a classic security dilemma. Each side's actions taken to enhance its own security end up making the other side feel less secure, which can lead to a spiral of escalation.
So how do you break out of that cycle?
Well, it requires a multifaceted approach,
Mm.
one that combines a credible deterrent to prevent Iran from taking aggressive actions, with sustained diplomatic efforts to address the underlying issues driving the tensions.
Yeah, and I guess the deterrent aspect seems fairly straightforward. Maintaining a strong military presence in the region and making it clear that any attack on U.S. interests will be met with a swift and decisive response.
That's part of it. But it also requires demonstrating that the U.S. is not seeking regime change in Iran, that it's willing to engage in good faith diplomacy if Iran is willing to reciprocate.
And on the diplomatic front, what would that entail?
Well, it would involve addressing Iran's legitimate security concerns, recognizing that they too face threats in the region, and finding ways to build trust and confidence.
But what about Iran's nuclear program? I mean, that seems to be the biggest sticking point.
It is a major obstacle, but it's not insurmountable. It requires a willingness on both sides to compromise, perhaps a phased approach, where Iran gradually scales back its nuclear activities in exchange for the lifting of sanctions and other concessions.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly difficult to achieve, given the level of mistrust that exists between the two countries.
It certainly won't be easy, but the alternative, a war with potentially catastrophic consequences, is simply too terrible to contemplate.
Absolutely. This deep dive has really highlighted the complexities of the situation and the high stakes involved.
It has. It's a reminder that there are no easy solutions in geopolitics. Understanding the historical context, the geographical realities, the economic factors, the internal dynamics of the countries involved, it's all crucial for making informed decisions.
And perhaps most importantly, it underscores the need for clear-eyed assessments, strategic thinking, and a commitment to dialogue and diplomacy.
Absolutely. Without those elements, the risk of stumbling into a conflict that no one wants remains all too real.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today and gained a much deeper understanding of the forces at play in this critical region.
I agree. It's been a thought-provoking discussion.
It really has. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Iranian geopolitics. We hope you found it informative and engaging.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you.
And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these issues and to engage in informed discussions about the challenges and opportunities facing Iran and the world. Until next time, keep diving deep.